First contact in the quantum void. Dr. Sarah Chen stared at her quantum computer's readout for the fifth time, trying to convince herself she wasn't hallucinating. The quantum noise patterns shouldn't have been repeating. Random was random. That was the whole point. But there it was again. A distinct pattern buried in the quantum fluctuations, like a whisper in static. "Hey Marcus, can you look at this?" she called to her research partner. Marcus Drake looked up from his own terminal at the quantum research facility, his dark features illuminated by holographic displays. "Found another ghost in the machine?" he asked, rolling his chair over. It was a running joke between them. How many false patterns they'd chased in their 3 years of quantum computing research. "This is different," Sarah said, pulling up the visualization. "Look at the decoherence patterns. They're structured." Marcus leaned forward, his casual demeanor shifting as he processed the data. "That's impossible. Quantum states can't maintain coherence at this scale, not unless something or someone is maintaining them," Sarah finished. The implications hung heavy in the air-conditioned lab. Their project had been simple in theory. Develop more stable quantum computing by studying natural quantum processes, but they'd stumbled onto something else entirely. Over the next several hours, they ran every verification test they could think of. The pattern remained, defying everything they knew about quantum mechanics. It wasn't just noise. It was a signal. "We need to tell Dr. Patel," Marcus said finally, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. Sarah nodded, already drafting the email. As lead researcher, Patel would either validate their discovery or point out whatever obvious thing they'd missed. Either way, she wasn't sleeping until she knew. Dr. Patel arrived within an hour, her usual immaculate appearance slightly disheveled, suggesting she'd rushed in from home. She said nothing as they showed her the data, her expression growing more intense with each slide. "Show me the raw data," she said finally. "All of it." They pulled up everything. 3 months of quantum noise readings, pattern analysis, and statistical breakdowns. Dr. Patel moved through it with practiced efficiency, occasionally muttering under her breath in Hindi. "Have you considered," she said slowly, "that we might be looking at a form of communication?" Sarah's heart rate jumped. "You mean?" "I mean that these patterns share characteristics with information encoding. They're too regular to be natural, too complex to be an artifact of our equipment, and too persistent to be random quantum fluctuations." Marcus let out a long breath. "So either our understanding of quantum mechanics is completely wrong, or someone is using quantum states to communicate," Sarah finished. "But who? And how? The energy required to maintain quantum coherence at this scale would be astronomical," Dr. Patel agreed, "unless they've found a way around the decoherence problem, a way we haven't even imagined yet." The implications were staggering. If someone had solved quantum decoherence, they'd revolutionize not just computing but physics itself. And if that someone wasn't human, "We need to respond," Sarah said suddenly. Both Marcus and Dr. Patel turned to look at her. "Respond?" Marcus asked. "How do you respond to a quantum signal we barely understand?" Sarah was already moving to her workstation. "The same way humans have always communicated with the unknown. We start with mathematics. Universal constants, prime numbers, basic patterns that any advanced civilization would recognize. And if they are alien," Dr. Patel said carefully, "are you certain attracting their attention is wise?" Sarah's fingers paused over her keyboard. "They're already here, in a sense, already communicating. I think the real question is, can we afford not to answer?" Dr. Patel studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Do it. But we follow containment protocols. Nothing leaves this lab, no external networks. If this goes wrong, it stays contained." Over the next 12 hours, they worked to encode a response. Prime numbers first, then the value of pi, then the fine structure constant. Universal mathematical truths that would prove their intelligence and scientific understanding. It took 3 days of continuous transmission before they got a response. Sarah was alone in the lab when it happened, running late-night diagnostics. The quantum noise shifted, transformed, and suddenly their mathematical sequence was being repeated back to them, with additions. Her hand shook as she hit the emergency contact button. Within 30 minutes, the lab was full again, all of them staring at the incoming data with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "They're not just repeating," Marcus said, analyzing the pattern. "They're teaching us their mathematical notation, building on what we sent." "More than that," Sarah said, her voice tight with excitement. "Look at these sequences. They're showing us how they maintain quantum coherence. It's beautiful." Dr. Patel was already on her secure phone, speaking rapidly to someone in government. Sarah barely noticed, her attention fixed on the incoming data. The aliens, and they had to be aliens, weren't just communicating. They were sharing knowledge. As dawn broke over the facility, Sarah finally stepped away from her station, her mind reeling with the implications. They'd made first contact with an alien civilization advanced enough to manipulate quantum states as easily as humans manipulated radio waves. And they were willing to teach us. But as she stared out the window at the rising sun, a thought nagged at her. Why now? Why here? Was this really first contact, or had they been waiting for humanity to advance enough to notice them? And more importantly, what did they want from us? The quantum computer chirped, drawing her attention back. New patterns were forming, more complex than before. As she rushed back to her station, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Humanity had stepped onto a much larger stage, and there would be no going back. The real question was, were we ready for what came next? The translation protocol. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of caffeine and quantum mathematics. Sarah's team had grown from 3 to 30, with linguists and cryptographers joining the physicists in their attempt to decipher the increasingly complex quantum communications. "It's like they're building a language from scratch," Dr. Eliza Martinez, their lead linguist, explained during one of their daily briefings. But not just any language. They're creating a shared mathematical and scientific framework first. Sarah nodded, studying the latest transmissions. They're being methodical, teaching us their basic concepts before moving to more complex ideas. Which makes sense, Marcus added, given that we're trying to communicate across what might be fundamentally different ways of perceiving reality. A species that exists partially in quantum states might think very differently from us. The breakthrough came on day 16. Sarah was cross-referencing their latest quantum signals with their growing database when she noticed something odd. The patterns weren't just carrying information. They were changing the quantum states of nearby particles in predictable ways. "They're not just sending us messages," she announced to the team. "They're teaching us how to manipulate quantum states directly. Each transmission is like a practical demonstration." Dr. Patel frowned. "Are you suggesting they're giving us their technology?" "Not exactly," Sarah said, pulling up the data. "It's more like they're teaching us the fundamental principles, like showing a medieval society the laws of electromagnetics before giving them a radio." The military observers in the room shifted uncomfortably. Since the discovery, there had been constant debate about the security implications. Some saw it as an unprecedented opportunity, others as a potential threat. "Can we be certain this isn't some form of technological Trojan horse?" Colonel Richards asked, voicing the military's constant concern. "That's what makes this so brilliant," Marcus interjected. "They're not giving us technology. They're teaching us physics. We can verify every principle, test every concept. They're helping us discover rather than simply giving us answers." Sarah turned to the quantum display, where new patterns were forming. "Look at this. They're showing us how quantum entanglement can be maintained across vast distances. It's everything we thought was impossible, but they're proving it step by step." The team worked through the night, translating the latest transmissions. With each passing hour, their understanding grew. The aliens, whom they'd started calling the quantums for lack of a better term, existed in a state that overlapped both normal space and quantum space. "It's like they're teaching us a new sense," Sarah explained to Dr. Patel. Imagine trying to explain color to someone who's never seen it. That's what they're doing with quantum mechanics. But on day 21, everything changed. The regular patterns of scientific exchange were suddenly interrupted by something new, something urgent. Sarah was the first to notice the change. These patterns, they're different, more complex, but also more repetitive, like they're trying to emphasize something. Dr. Martinez leaned in, studying the new transmissions. The structure reminds me of warning signals in human languages. Repeated elements, increased intensity. They're trying to tell us something, Marcus said, something important. Over the next few hours, the message became clearer. The quantums were sharing information about disturbances in quantum space, patterns that shouldn't exist, anomalies that defied their understanding. Whatever they're warning us about, Sarah said, it's affecting both our reality and theirs. Dr. Patel's expression was grave. Can we respond? Ask for clarification. I think. Sarah hesitated, studying the patterns. I think they're already trying to show us. Look at these sequences. They're not just warning us. They're showing us how to detect these anomalies ourselves. The team worked frantically to adapt their quantum computers, following the aliens' instructions. As their sensors came online, they began to see what had the quantums so concerned. Throughout quantum space, something was moving, spreading, consuming. It's like quantum cancer, Marcus said, watching the readings, corrupting both normal and quantum space wherever it spreads. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. And if we can see it now, it's getting closer, Dr. Patel finished. The military observers were already on their phones, reporting up their chain of command. The theoretical had just become very real and very dangerous. We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with, Sarah said, turning back to her station. And we need to do it fast. As if in response, new patterns flooded their quantum receivers. The quantums were transmitting faster now, with an urgency that transcended the language barrier. Whatever was coming, they wanted humanity to be prepared. Look at this, Marcus called out. They're showing us how these anomalies affect normal space. The physics doesn't make sense. It's like reality itself is being rewritten. Sarah studied the data, her mind racing. The quantums had spent weeks teaching them their science, preparing them for this moment. Now they knew why. We're not just making first contact, she realized. We're being recruited. Dr. Patel raised an eyebrow. Recruited for what? Sarah looked at the quantum displays, where the evidence of approaching destruction was becoming clearer by the minute. I think we're about to find out. As if to confirm her words, new patterns began forming in the quantum noise. Patterns that would change everything they thought they knew about reality, space, and humanity's place in the universe. The real fight was just beginning. Dimensional breach. The first breach appeared over Antarctica. Sarah and her team watched via satellite feed as reality itself seemed to tear, a shimmering distortion that defied both normal and quantum physics. It's beautiful, Marcus whispered, in a terrifying sort of way. The tear in spacetime sprawled across the southern sky like an aurora made of broken glass, its edges rippling with impossible colors. Their quantum sensors were going haywire, showing readings that shouldn't have been possible. Status report, Dr. Patel demanded, her usual composure strained. Sarah pulled up the latest data. The breach is stable and growing. It's exactly what the quantums warned us about, a convergence point between normal space and quantum space. And what's coming through? Colonel Richards asked, his voice tight. As if in answer, their screens lit up with new data. The quantums were transmitting again, this time with detailed scans of the breach. The images they sent were difficult for human minds to comprehend. Structures that existed in multiple states simultaneously, entities that defied conventional physics. They're calling them void eaters, Dr. Martinez said, translating the latest quantum communications. At least, that's the closest approximation in our language. The satellite feed showed dark shapes moving within the breach, like shadows cast by objects in another dimension. Wherever they touched normal space, reality seemed to unravel. The quantums are saying these entities consume both normal and quantum space, Sarah explained. They break down the fundamental forces that keep reality stable, and they're spreading. Can we stop them? Colonel Richards asked. Sarah shared a look with Marcus. The quantums have been fighting them for what translates to millions of years. They've managed to contain them, but never defeat them entirely. That's why they reached out to us. To humanity. Dr. Patil asked skeptically, what can we do that they haven't tried in millions of years? We think differently, Marcus said. The quantums exist partially in quantum states. Their thinking, their technology, everything about them is based on quantum principles. But that means they have blind spots, ways of thinking they'd never consider. Sarah nodded. They've given us their knowledge, their understanding of quantum physics, but they're hoping we'll use it in ways they never imagined. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity, barely able to manipulate quantum states, was being asked to help fight an enemy that had stymied an advanced quantum civilization for eons. We need to coordinate with the quantums, Sarah said finally. They've shown us how to establish more direct communication, if we can set up quantum relays around the breach. Do it, Dr. Patil ordered. Whatever resources you need. The next 48 hours were a blur of activity. Military forces established a perimeter around the breach, while Sarah's team worked to build the quantum relays. The quantums continued transmitting, sharing everything they knew about the Void Eaters. Look at this, Marcus called out during their second straight night of work. The quantums are showing us how the Void Eaters affect quantum entanglement. When they consume space, they don't just destroy it. They sever all quantum connections. Sarah studied the data, her tired mind racing. That's why the quantums can't beat them. Their entire civilization depends on quantum connections. These things don't just threaten their space. They threaten their very existence. But we don't depend on quantum connections, Dr. Martine said slowly. At least, not yet. Exactly, Sarah said, excitement building despite her exhaustion. We might be less advanced, but we're also less vulnerable. We can approach this problem from a completely different angle. The quantum relays came online just as the breach began its second phase of expansion. Through them, they established their first real-time communication with the quantums. The exchange was unlike anything in human experience, a flood of information that existed in multiple states simultaneously. They're confirming our theories, Sarah reported. The Void Eaters can't process linear causality. They exist in quantum superposition, which is why the quantums can't fight them effectively. But humans think linearly, Marcus added. We understand cause and effect in ways the quantums don't. We might be able to use that. Before they could elaborate, alarms blared throughout the facility. The breach was pulsing with new energy, its edges expanding rapidly. Multiple entities emerging, the military observer reported. They're heading toward populated areas. Sarah watched in horror as the dark shapes began to move with purpose, leaving trails of unraveled reality in their wake. The quantum's transmissions became more urgent, conveying both warning and encouragement. They're saying we don't have much time, Dr. Martinez translated. Once the Void Eaters establish a foothold in normal space, then we better make sure that doesn't happen, Sarah said, turning to her team. The quantums have given us their knowledge. Now it's time to show them what humanity can do with it. As if in response, one of the quantum displays lit up with a new pattern, a complex sequence that seemed to bridge the gap between quantum and classical physics. Sarah stared at it, her mind racing with possibilities. I think, she said slowly, I know how we can fight back. The team gathered around her station as she began to explain, none of them aware that they were about to attempt something that would rewrite the laws of physics as both humanity and the quantums understood them. The real question was, would it be enough? The human variable. It's like trying to punch smoke, Marcus said, watching another military attempt to engage the Void Eaters fail. Conventional weapons passed right through them, while advanced quantum-based weapons, the quantums had helped them develop, barely slowed them down. Sarah barely heard him, her attention fixed on the data streaming across her screens. Something had been nagging at her ever since they'd first detected the breach, a pattern she couldn't quite grasp. "Look at this," she said suddenly, pulling up multiple feeds. "Every time we try to affect the Void Eaters directly, they exist in too many states for us to target. But when they're consuming space, they have to collapse into a single state," Marcus finished, catching on. "They can't maintain quantum superposition while they're feeding." Dr. Paddle leaned forward. "Are you suggesting they're vulnerable during those moments?" "Not exactly," Sarah said. "Even in a single state, they're still incredibly powerful. But what if that's not the real opportunity? What if we're thinking about this all wrong?" She pulled up the Quantum's latest transmission. "They've been fighting these things for millions of years, always trying to destroy them directly. But what if that's impossible? What if instead we change the rules?" Marcus said, his eyes widening. "Sarah, that's brilliant and insane. Share with the rest of us," Colonel Richards demanded. Sarah took a deep breath. "The Void Eaters consume space itself, breaking down the barriers between quantum and normal reality. But what if we could use that? What if, instead of trying to destroy them, we trap them in a state of perpetual consumption?" She pulled up a diagram. "We create a quantum loop, a space that feeds back into itself. When they try to consume it, they'll be caught in an endless cycle. Like a Mobius strip of reality," Marcus added. "They can't stop consuming, can't exist in multiple states while they feed, and can't break free without violating their own nature." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Quantum's transmissions had taken on a different tone. Confusion mixed with growing excitement as they processed the concept. "They're saying this shouldn't be possible," Dr. Martinez translated. "The energy requirements alone would be astronomical." Sarah agreed. "Unless we use their own consumption process against them. They're already breaking down the barriers between realities. We just need to shape where that energy goes." Dr. Paddle studied the proposal. "Can we test this on a small scale?" "We already have the quantum relays in place," Marcus said. "If we reconfigure them." "Do it," Colonel Richards ordered. "Whatever you need." The next 12 hours were a frenzy of activity. The Quantums, once they understood the plan, provided crucial insights into how to manipulate quantum space at the necessary scale. But the fundamental concept, the idea of using the enemy's nature against itself, was purely human. "It's ready," Sarah announced finally, looking at the modified quantum relay network. "As ready as it's going to be, anyway." The timing was crucial. The Void Eaters had already consumed several square kilometers of Antarctic territory, creating a dead zone where the laws of physics simply ceased to function. They were spreading, learning, adapting to normal space. "The Quantums are in position," Dr. Martins reported. "They'll help stabilize the quantum aspects of the trap, but the trigger has to come from our side, from normal space." Sarah nodded, her fingers hovering over the controls. Everything they knew about physics said this shouldn't work, but everything they knew about physics had been wrong before. "On my mark," she said, watching the Void Eaters' movement patterns. They needed them to be feeding, to be locked into a single state. The creatures moved like oil on water, spreading, consuming, breaking down reality itself. But there was a pattern to their hunger, a rhythm they couldn't break. Now, the quantum relays activated simultaneously, creating a complex geometric pattern of overlapping fields. The Void Eaters, in the midst of feeding, suddenly found themselves caught in a space that looped back on itself, a quantum Klein bottle that used their own consumption process as its energy source. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then reality itself seemed to hiccup. The Void Eaters, trapped in their feeding state, began to chase their own tails through the looped space, unable to stop consuming, unable to shift back into multiple states. It's working, Marcus breathed, watching the readings. They're trapped in a causality loop of their own making. The quantum's transmissions were a mix of amazement and validation. They'd never considered such a solution because their quantum nature made it literally unthinkable to them. It took a species that existed primarily in linear space to conceive of using that linearity as a weapon. But as they watched the trapped void eaters, Sarah noticed something unexpected. The creatures weren't just trapped, they were changing. The endless loop of consumption was doing something to their fundamental nature. "Look at this," she said, pulling up the quantum scans. "The loop isn't just containing them, it's forcing them to evolve." The implications were staggering. They hadn't just found a way to fight the void eaters, they might have discovered a way to transform them entirely. As the team watched in awe, Sarah felt a new pattern forming in the quantum noise. The quantums were transmitting again, but this time it wasn't just information or gratitude. It was an invitation. Convergence. The quantum trap had been active for 72 hours, and reality itself was being rewritten. Sarah stood before the assembled team of scientists and military officials, trying to explain what they were witnessing. "The void eaters aren't just being contained," she said, gesturing to the latest readings. "They're becoming something else. The constant loop of consumption and causality is forcing them to adapt, to evolve." The holographic display showed the trapped entities, their once chaotic forms now taking on more structured patterns. Where they had been shadows that devoured reality, they were becoming bridges between quantum and normal space. "The quantums are calling it convergence," Dr. Martinez translated. "They've never seen anything like it. The void eaters are transforming into a new state of matter entirely." Marcus pulled up the latest scans. "It's like they're becoming quantum transformers, converting the chaos of void energy into structured quantum states. They're still consuming reality, but now they're rebuilding it as they go." Colonel Richards frowned. "Is that safe?" "More than safe," Sarah said, excitement creeping into her voice. "It's revolutionary. The quantums have already confirmed that these transformed entities are creating stable bridges between quantum and normal space. Natural quantum computers, essentially." Dr. Paddle leaned forward. "And the quantum's invitation?" Sarah nodded, pulling up their latest transmission. "They want to establish permanent cooperation between our species. They've seen what we can accomplish together. How human linear thinking combined with their quantum understanding creates possibilities neither of us could have imagined alone." The implications were staggering. Humanity had not only helped solve a threat that had plagued an advanced civilization for millions of years, they'd turned that threat into a tool for advancement. "The transformed void eaters can maintain stable quantum states at room temperature," Marcus explained. "Do you understand what this means? Quantum computing, quantum communication, even quantum transportation. Everything becomes possible." "And the breach?" Colonel Richards asked. "Closing naturally," Sarah replied. "Without the original void eaters' chaotic consumption, the tear between realities is healing itself. But we're left with something better: controlled, stable passages between quantum and normal space." The quantum displays lit up with new patterns, the quantums sharing their vision of the future. Images of joint research facilities, of humans and quantum beings working together to explore the boundaries of reality itself. "They're offering us acceleration," Dr. Martinez translated. "Not just giving us their technology, but helping us develop our own path to quantum integration. They believe our different perspectives are crucial to future development." "A fusion of approaches," Sarah added. "Their quantum mastery with our ability to think outside quantum limitations. They're calling it the beginning of a new era." Dr. Petal studied the proposals carefully. "And you believe we're ready for this?" Sarah looked at her team, at the evidence of what they'd already accomplished. "I think we've proven we are. We didn't just solve the void eater problem. We transformed it into something beneficial. That's uniquely human. We don't just overcome obstacles, we reshape them into opportunities." The quantum displays shifted again, showing the transformed Void Eaters creating stable quantum networks across the Antarctic test site, where there had been chaos and destruction. Now there was structured growth, controlled evolution. "This is just the beginning," Sarah said, watching the new reality take shape. "We've proven that the combination of human and quantum perspectives can achieve the impossible. Imagine what we'll discover next." As if in response, the quantum signals shifted into a new pattern, one that Sarah recognized as an expression of joy and anticipation. The quantums weren't just allies now. They were partners in exploration, eager to see what their combined civilizations could achieve. Marcus stepped up beside her, watching the displays. "You know this changes everything, right? Physics, computing, space travel. Every field of human knowledge is about to be revolutionized." Sarah nodded, a smile playing at her lips. "That's what humans do best, isn't it? We take what seems impossible and make it inevitable." Above them, the Antarctic sky had cleared of its quantum distortions, replaced by the steady glow of controlled quantum bridges. The transformed Void Eaters, once a threat to existence itself, now served as guardians of these new passages between realities. It was, Sarah reflected, a perfectly human solution. Turning destroyers into creators, chaos into order, enemies into allies, and somewhere in the quantum realm, their new partners were beginning to understand just how powerful that human perspective could be. The future beckoned, full of possibilities that neither humans nor quantums could have imagined alone. But together, there seemed to be no limit to what they might achieve. It wasn't just first contact anymore. It was first convergence, the beginning of something entirely new in the history of both species. And this was just day one. End of story.